You've probably seen the headlines lately, maybe caught the trailers for that big movie. The name J. Robert Oppenheimer, it's everywhere, often, tied to that phrase, destroyer of worlds.
Hmm.
But who was the man behind the atomic bomb, really? What's beneath that single world-changing achievement?
Well, that's what we're diving into. This is basically your shortcut to understanding the really complex life of Oppenheimer.
Perfect.
We'll get into the science, the huge journey that led to the bomb, but also the consequences, the long-lasting effects of using it.
And his relationships, too, right? Like with Einstein.
Exactly. His relationship with Einstein is particularly fascinating. Our goal here is really to pull out the key insights from our sources, help you grasp the science, sure, but also the history and the human dilemmas. It's all tangled up in the start of the atomic age.
Okay, let's unpack that first part then.
Hmm.
Oppenheimer the man. Beyond this sort of public image, what was he actually like?
Well, he was born in 1904 into a pretty wealthy German Jewish family in New York City. And right from the start, he was incredibly precocious.
How so?
Get this, writing poetry when he was 10. And at just 12 years old, he was lecturing the New York Mineralogical Society. They apparently had no idea he was a kid until he showed up. They were pretty surprised by his level of knowledge.
Wow. Lecturing at 12, that's something else. But it sounds like that early brilliance didn't mean life was easy for him.
No, far from it, actually. When he was studying over at Cambridge, he was apparently deeply unhappy. There's that infamous story where he tried to poison his tutor.
Poison his tutor?
Yeah, Patrick Blackett. Apparently laced an apple with some chemicals. Luckily, the tutor didn't eat it, and Oppenheimer's parents managed to intervene so there weren't criminal charges. But yeah, he struggled with depression, suicidal thoughts, even needed psychoanalysis.
That's a stark contrast to the genius image.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like, later on, he wasn't always complimentary about his peers either. In his younger days, he apparently called Princeton a madhouse and even referred to Albert Einstein as completely cuckoo.
Huh. So brilliant, yes, but definitely grappling with some inner turmoil. How did he find his professional footing then?
He really hit his stride when he moved to Göttingen in Germany, studying theoretical physics under Max Born. He found his people there, a community that could keep up with his intellectual intensity.
Great.
And he quickly got this reputation for just grasping things incredibly fast, this uncanny speed, they called it, and for being intellectually generous too, but there was another side.
Oh.
Yeah, he was also known for having an arrogant streak, apparently, and could be capable of intellectual cruelty sometimes. A complex figure, definitely.
And his interests went beyond just the physics lab, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
He was fascinated by Eastern philosophy, mysticism, went so far as to learn Sanskrit so he could read texts like the Bhagavad Gita in the original.
Sanskrit, wow.
Yeah. For him, physics wasn't just equations. It was like a way into understanding the universe on a deeper, almost mystical level. And that mix, the scientific rigor and the philosophical curiosity that really defined him.
Okay, so let's pivot now to the science itself. The incredible journey that led to the bomb. What were the sort of key building blocks?
Well, the path to splitting the atom, it actually goes back centuries. You start with Martin Klaproth discovering uranium way back in 1789.
Right.
Then, much later, you have Marie Curie coining the term radioactive in the late 1800s, and Ernest Rutherford's 1911 model of the atom, the nucleus with electrons orbiting. That was another huge step.
But the 1930s, that seems to be when things really kicked into high gear.
Absolutely. A whirlwind decade. You had Leo Szilard in 33, conceiving the idea of a nuclear chain reaction.
Okay.
Then Enrico Fermi in 34, while doing experiments, he actually split neutrons in uranium without even realizing it at the time. And then, critically, Lise Meitner, working with Otto Hahn, they achieved the first successful intentional fission of uranium, but Meitner, being Jewish, had to flee Nazi Germany. It was actually after she fled that she identified and named the process nuclear fission.
And that discovery.
Yeah.
It must have immediately set off alarm bells, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the world heading towards war, the potential for a weapon.
Precisely. Szilard, who is now in the U.S., he redid the experiment and saw the implications straight away. He said something like, "That night, there was very little doubt in my mind that the world was headed for grief."
Yelling.
Yeah. And that's what led him to reach out to Albert Einstein. Together, they drafted that famous letter to President Roosevelt in August 39.
The Einstein-Szilard letter.
Right, warning FDR about the possibility of extremely powerful bombs of a new type.
So that letter really was the catalyst for what became the Manhattan Project. How did Oppenheimer get involved in this massive, top-secret effort?
He was basically handpicked by Major General Leslie Groves. Groves was running the military side of the project, and he needed someone to lead the scientific effort at the main lab.
Which became Los Alamos.
Exactly. A secret city built practically overnight in the New Mexico desert. Groves initially wanted a Nobel laureate, someone with that kind of prestige.
But he chose Oppenheimer, who hadn't won one yet.
Right, because Oppenheimer had this incredible ability to grasp everything, the physics, the chemistry, the engineering, and bring it all together. And maybe just as importantly, he could inspire and lead this huge, diverse team. Groves said he was absolutely essential.
Well, it was a huge team.
Oh, yeah. Over 5,000 scientists and engineers eventually, many of whom did go on to win Nobel Prizes later. Oppenheimer pulled them all together.
So they have the best minds, the theory, this urgent mission. What were the biggest practical, engineering hurdles they had to overcome?
Well, the number one challenge was just getting the materials. You needed enriched uranium or plutonium, and both are incredibly rare, incredibly difficult to produce in the quantities needed for a bomb.
Okay, so material production was key. What about the bomb design itself?
That was the other huge problem. For the uranium bomb, little boy, they came up with a relatively simpler design, a kind of gun mechanism where you fire one piece of uranium into another to start the chain reaction.
Right.
But for the plutonium bomb, Fat Man, that wouldn't work. Plutonium is trickier. They had to invent this incredibly complex implosion method.
Implosion?
Yeah, using conventional explosives arranged precisely around a sphere of plutonium to crush it inwards, making it go critical. It was totally untested, highly theoretical.
And that uncertainty led them to decide they needed to test, right? The Trinity test.
Exactly. They had to know if the implosion design would actually work. So, July 16th, 1945, out in the New Mexico desert, the world's first atomic detonation.
And the scale of it.
Immense, equivalent to 21,000 tons of TNT. A fireball almost half a mile wide. That mushroom cloud rising 12 kilometers, like 7.5 miles, into the sky.
Incredible power.
And the heat was so intense it literally melted the desert sand into this greenish, glassy rock. They called it trinitite.
It's fascinating, though. Even with all that science, there were some terrifying unknowns right up until the moment of the test, weren't there?
Oh, absolutely. There was this genuinely chilling debate among the scientists, sometimes called Fermi's wager.
What was the wager?
They seriously discussed the possibility, however remote they calculated it to be, that the explosion might be so powerful it could ignite the Earth's atmosphere.
Ignite the atmosphere, like set the whole planet on fire.
Yeah, trigger a runaway fusion reaction in the nitrogen and oxygen, burn up the world. They did calculations, concluded it was very unlikely, but they weren't absolutely 100% certain it couldn't happen.
Yeah, they pushed the button anyway.
They pushed the button anyway. As someone put it, they were willing to do the experiment to find out. It's quite something to think about.
And then, just weeks after that successful test, the consequences became horribly real for people.
Yes. August 6th, 1945, the uranium bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, August 9th, the plutonium bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki.
The human cost.
Unimaginable. There are accounts from survivors like Setsuko Thurlow. She describes seeing a bluish-white flash and then people like ghosts, their skin and flesh burned black. Her own sister, her little 4-year-old nephew, she said they were just melted. It's horrific.
And Oppenheimer himself. How did he react watching this unfold, knowing he'd overseen its creation?
Famously, he recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
That iconic quote.
Right, and it's complex because on one hand, he'd given very specific instructions, target the city centers for maximum destructive impact. But reports suggest he was also deeply ambivalent, deeply empathetic about the human tragedy he knew was coming.
So the impact in Japan was immediate and devastating. But what about the effects closer to home? Near the test site itself.
That's a crucial part of the story often overlooked. The communities in New Mexico living near the Trinity site, they became known as the downwinders.
Downwinders.
Yeah. People whose land was taken for the project, who did, as Tina Cordoga puts it, the dirtiest of jobs, like mining the uranium, and then were exposed to the radioactive fallout from the test.
Tina Cordova, she's an advocate for them, right?
Yes, co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. She points out that the test site wasn't some empty void. There were thousands of people living relatively nearby.
And the health impact on those communities has been severe,
Hmm.
lasting generations.
Absolutely devastating. The government described the area as remote and uninhabited, but estimates suggest 15,000 people were within a 50-mile radius. And recent studies show the fallout actually spread across most of the U.S.
Wow.
Tina Cordova talks about her own family being on its fourth generation of cancer, and data shows a significant spike in infant deaths in New Mexico right after the Trinity test. It's a terrible legacy.
Which brings us back to that huge ongoing debate. Was using the bomb actually necessary to end the war?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The official argument, the one President Truman used, was that it saved potentially hundreds of thousands of American lives by avoiding a bloody ground invasion of Japan.
But not everyone agrees with that assessment.
No. Many historians, and certainly survivors like Setsuko Thurlow, they argue that's just a convenient excuse. They contend Japan was already on the ropes, exhausted, likely looking for a way to surrender anyway.
So the argument is the U.S. may be rushed to use it.
Thurlow suggests the U.S. wanted to use those bombs as quickly as possible once the Trinity test proved they worked. It's a perspective that challenges the standard narrative.
And what about the scientists involved, like Oppenheimer? What's the ethical burden there? Are they responsible for how their creations are used?
While physicist Zia Mian argues, pretty forcefully, absolutely. He says scientists have to be held to the same standards of responsibility as anyone else.
But did they foresee this outcome?
Mian points out that many involved in the Manhattan Project didn't actually think the bomb would ever be used on cities. Early British memos even suggested the civilian casualties from fallout alone might make it unusable. So there was perhaps a disconnect between creation and deployment, but Mian insists the responsibility remains.
Okay, so the war ends. Oppenheimer is suddenly this huge national figure, right? The father of the A-bomb. What did he envision for this new atomic age he'd helped create?
He moved very quickly into a government advisory role, and his initial big push was for international control over atomic weapons.
How so?
He co-authored something called the Acheson-Leonthal Report. It was this really quite visionary proposal for an international agency to manage all atomic energy development, materials, everything. He knew it sounded radical.
What did he say about it?
He acknowledged people would say it was impossible, but his response was basically, our answer is we must. He saw the danger clearly.
But that idealistic vision didn't quite pan out, did it? The Cold War got in the way.
It did, unfortunately. The growing hostility between the U.S. and the Soviet Union basically killed the plan. The U.S. went ahead with more tests, which Oppenheimer actually opposed.
So he became disillusioned.
It seems so. He sort of shifted his position. If elimination wasn't possible, then the world had to figure out how to live successfully and peacefully with nuclear weapons. He even ended up advising the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, to provide atomic weapons and good atomic weapons and many atomic weapons, a real shift.
And that shift, plus his earlier stance, eventually put him in conflict with some powerful people, didn't it? Like Lewis Strauss at the AEC and Edward Teller.
Exactly right. The big flashpoint was the hydrogen bomb, the H-bomb, which was orders of magnitude more powerful than the fission bombs.
This was after the Soviets tested their first A-bomb in '49.
Yes. Suddenly, there was this huge push in the U.S. to build the H-bomb. Oppenheimer chaired the General Advisory Committee to the AEC, and they voted unanimously 8-0 against developing it. They called it a weapon of genocide. They argued there was no military necessity for something that destructive.
That's strong opposition. That must have made him enemies.
It certainly did, and it played a major role in what happened next during the height of the Red Scare, the McCarthy era.
Right, the security hearing in 1954.
Yeah. His security clearance was suddenly suspended. He faced accusations about his past associations, alleged communist sympathies, even though the review board itself later concluded he was a loyal citizen and found no evidence he was a member of the party in the strict sense.
So the hearing itself, it sounds like it wasn't exactly a fair process.
Oh, it was deeply flawed. His own lawyers didn't have security clearance to see all the evidence being used against him.
Seriously.
Yeah. Well, the prosecutor, Roger Robb, did have access to classified files and used them against Oppenheimer. And then you had Edward Teller.
His former colleague from Los Alamos, the one who wanted the H-bomb.
Right. Teller testified against him, basically suggesting Oppenheimer's opposition to the H-bomb was suspicious, even hinting it might be due to Soviet influence, like direct orders from Moscow.
Wow. Was there any basis for that?
It seems highly unlikely. Many believe it was driven more by professional jealousy and Teller's own passionate belief that the U.S. needed nuclear superiority at any cost.
So what was the final verdict from the hearing?
By a vote of 2-1, they recommended his security clearance not be reinstated, and the AEC confirmed it. His official connection to the U.S. government's nuclear program was severed.
How did the wider scientific community take that?
They were largely outraged. Many saw him as a victim, a martyr to McCarthyism. As one prominent scientist famously put it, in England, Oppenheimer would have been knighted, not stripped of his clearance.
And his relationship with Einstein during all this. They were colleagues at the Institute for Advanced Study by then, right?
They were offices just down the hall from each other. It was complicated. Publicly, Oppenheimer praised Einstein, called him the greatest colleague.
But privately.
Privately, Oppenheimer was apparently quite critical of Einstein's later scientific work, didn't think he was on the right track anymore.
In Einstein's view of Oppenheimer.
Einstein famously called Oppenheimer a nar, that's Yiddish for fool, for even agreeing to go through with the security hearing. He basically told Oppenheimer he should have just walked away.
What was his quote? Something about loving the government.
Yeah, Einstein reportedly quipped, "The trouble with Oppenheimer is that he loves a woman who doesn't love him, the United States government." So they respected each other as humanists, perhaps, but their scientific views diverged, and Einstein clearly thought Oppenheimer was being naive about the political game.
So we've really covered a lot here. Oppenheimer's journey from this brilliant, troubled young man to the leader of the Manhattan Project, the father of the bomb, then his post-war advocacy, the clash over the H-bomb, and that very public downfall during the Red Scare. It's an incredible, complex story.
It truly is. This deep dive hopefully gives you a really solid handle on this pivotal moment, this pivotal figure.
His story really is a powerful lens on the immense power of science, but also the unintended consequences, the ethical weight.
Definitely. It forces you to think about the human side of these huge scientific leaps.
And bringing it up to today. What's the relevance now? I mean, in 2022, the U.S. government actually reversed that 1954 decision. The Secretary of Energy said it was a flawed process and confirmed Oppenheimer's loyalty.
Right, a formal nullification, decades later.
So what does that late vindication tell us? About historical accountability, maybe? And about the choices scientists and policymakers face now with powerful new technologies?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? How do we learn from this? How do we create a system where, scientific progress goes hand in hand with deep ethical thinking and, importantly, open communication, especially when the stakes are so incredibly high, like they were then and arguably are now with things like AI?
Yeah, that's a really important point. You can definitely see the echoes of the Manhattan Project debates in discussions today about artificial intelligence or gene editing, biotechnology. Who's responsible? How do we manage the risks?
Exactly. What are the responsibilities of the creators? It's the Oppenheimer dilemma playing out again in new fields, something for all of us to think about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the life and legacy of J. Robert Oppenheimer.